Welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is it's one of the Global Coalition on Deinstitutionalization's thematic workshops on the guidelines to deinstitutionalization, including in emergencies. This is a webinar focused on international cooperation, and I will be today's moderator. My name is Amba Salelkar, and I work with the International Disability Alliance as the Senior Manager for Programs and Impact. In the chat box, you will be able to find captioning by external link. I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Alexandra from IDA Logistics and Webinars, who will take you through a few housekeeping notes before we begin today's webinar. Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you, Amba. Dear all, I am going to briefly explain some of the technical features of today's call. This meeting is being recorded. There is international sign interpretation, captioning in English, and language interpretation in Spanish. A CC button on the bottom of your screen will enable the closed caption. If you need the captions in the external window, the link is in the chat box. The interpretation button on the bottom of your screen, presented as a globe, will allow you to access a specific language channel. Please choose the channel that you will follow throughout the meeting. The participants do not have the opportunity of opening the microphones and video. Should you have any questions, kindly leave them in the Q&A section. We request all speakers to kindly keep to time and keep their cameras off if not speaking. We are asking that you speak slowly enough for the interpreters and the captioners to follow. Thank you all and have a good meeting.
Thank you, Alexandra, for that. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers today. They are representing organizations of persons with disabilities and organizations which are super committed to deinstitutionalization in various contexts. We have speakers from Latin America, from Africa, from Europe and the United Kingdom, as well as from Korea. And we also have a representative of the CRPD committee with us to round up discussions. So before I pass on to them, just a little bit of an introduction for those of you who may be new to this cause or to this webinar series. Like I said, this webinar is focused on the issue of deinstitutionalization, but also specifically looking at international cooperation and its role in deinstitutionalization. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is unique in having a dedicated article on international cooperation. This article underlines the role of international cooperation in supporting national efforts for the full realization on the rights of persons with disabilities. If we look at the CRPD committee guidelines, the guidelines which were developed by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on deinstitutionalization, Section 12 speaks specifically about international cooperation and its role in supporting deinstitutionalization reforms. When you have international cooperation being rendered in accordance with rights-based approaches, international cooperation can actually bridge the gap between resources and actions. And this international cooperation can be seen to facilitate both informal and formal community support and services. This is crucial for enabling people to live independently and within the community and prevent any risk of harm through deinstitutionalization processes. What we seek to look at in this webinar is to reflect on the current landscape and also looking at how international cooperation and shifts within international cooperation are affecting deinstitutionalized processes. And how can we leverage current developments around international cooperation for supporting our demands around deinstitutionalization. Now, let's remember that Article 32 does not think about international cooperation only as global north to global south. It doesn't think about it only in terms of money. International cooperation it could be transfer of skills, it could be knowledge sharing, it could be training, it could be technological resources, it could be just peer sharing between countries. There's a lot which we can think about when we look at Article 32, but sometimes it's only looking at funding, though funding is a huge enabler for the kind of changes that we need to see in order to effect effective deinstitutionalization. So without any further delays, I am going to invite our first speaker. Our first speaker is Samuel Macharia. Samuel is the Executive Director of Championing for Inclusive Communities in Kenya, and he's also a board member of TCI Global. Samuel is the founding director of this organization. The organization is focused on implementation and realization of Article 19 of the CRPD. His experiences as someone with a psychosocial disability has shaped his journey as a disability rights activist. And in the past, he has volunteered with users and survivors of Psychiatry Kenya. He's worked there also as a project manager. He's also been a fellow with the International Disability Alliance, of which we're very proud. And the work that he's doing now is really important in fulfilling the community inclusion required for effective deinstitutionalization. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Samuel. Samuel will be taking you through a few issues around deinstitutionalization and the process involved around deinstitutionalization, and also how we can leverage international cooperation to address the gaps and challenges, specifically in the context of Africa, where he works. So Samuel, I'm going to hand you the floor. Thank you very much for joining
us. Thank you very much, Amber, for this particular moment and the detailed introduction of our webinar today. I feel like I'll just give a few highlights, but before I go into the international cooperation, may I just give a bit of background of what we do in Kenya. And I would also like to mention that CICK was part of the team that contributed towards the development of the deinstitutionalization guidelines at the TCI Global. So we are proud that now the deinstitutionalization guidelines have found a way of being implemented in the various countries that were part of the development. So when you look at the institutions around in the country, a good number of them comes from the laws that were passed by the British colonial system. And these are the laws that enable people to be taken from the community. They're either taken to psychiatric units, to schools, in the name of special education, in the name of specialized treatment, and also people being taken to prisons in the name of violating the law or living against the other citizens due to their disability, of which is part of discrimination. So the only way we can realize the reversal of the institutionalization of disability is by enacting laws or through the legislative processes that are going to reverse the entire process. I'm very sure the dynamics that are different from country to country, but in most cases, a universal approach is going to be taken, since we already have the international instruments like the UNCRPD, which if localized can help in the alleviation of the institutionalization of persons with disabilities. If I give a few examples, like in Kenya, we find that civil servants, some of them in psychosocial disabilities, sometimes are coerced into institutions, and they are coerced into specific institutions or at the threat of they are going to be fired from their place of work. And this is an arrangement between the wellness offices and the private mental health providers on how they are going to admit these particular civil servants. And in most cases, they have done that for 3 months under their own expenses. So they have to meet the cost of being in the institutions. Others, it's through the law. They face indefinite incarceration in psychiatric units. And the laws that take them to the prisons are laws to do with the issues with the access to justice, and they are deemed not fit to respond to trials. So they are incarcerated in some penal institutions, waiting for the presidential pardon. So some of them could have served a sentence of maybe 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, but then they end up spending their entire lives inside these institutions. The policies that we currently have, or the laws that we currently have, enable family members and healthcare providers
Your voice is breaking a bit. Can you put your camera off so that maybe that will improve the video quality?
Persons with disabilities, such that persons do not have the power of where they want to live and how
I think that Samuel may be having some issues with his internet connection. Samuel is back online. I will just check if he can continue his intervention. Samuel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, this is much better now. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So now we find that it is the family members and professionals who are taking people away from the communities instead of providing the psychosocial support or disability inclusive socioeconomic empowerment programs to enable people to live within the communities of their choice. And some of these preferred services could be access to education, employment, peer support groups, social economic programs like micro enterprises, employment, formal employment, community access to justice programs that could also alleviate the problem of taking people through the mainstream justice system and sort issues that some of them are very petty within communities. Also, the establishment of respite centers or drop-in centers and having social welfare programs within the community to cater for the basic needs of persons with disabilities. And also now the micro grants can support the entrepreneurship programs to support persons with disabilities in their social mobility. Other services are access to health, which should be provided within community, and housing to make sure that everybody lives in a safe house. Other programs like in social protection, cash transfer programs to get people with disabilities enrolled into these programs. Another question of international partnership. You find that most of the OPDs, like CAC Kenya, is only just beginning to operate, and we lack access to donor funding. We do not have that platform to be had by the governments. And it's just the time that we are forming partnerships, both locally and internationally. So the international community plays a key role in the enactment and enforcement of the UNCRPD through local human rights-based organizations, the umbrella disability bodies, the cross-disability movements, both within the nation, the region, as well as globally. And we can have joint programs together with the INGOs and the donors in trying to influence and advocate for policy and legal reform in the various republics. And I think by that, we will have achieved the very main aim of what we are discussing today, and that is the desocialization of persons with disabilities. Thank you very much, and I hand over back to you, Ember.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, and thank you for being able to join us back, and for that. I think that great introduction, especially if deinstitutionalization, if you're in the audience and it's something which is you're just trying to understand it. Samuel has done a really great job of outlining the services which are required for deinstitutionalization. It's not just about closing institutions. It's also on the it's two sides which require this this kind of discussion and investment. And indeed, there is a huge role that international cooperation plays when it comes to funding organizations to pilot these kinds of initiatives for community inclusion. And importantly, Samuel also highlighted the role of the cross-disability movement in enabling this. And that comes back to what we spoke about international cooperation being more than just funding. It's also something which can be enabling that kind of information sharing between countries and OPDs that have been involved in these processes. So thank you very much once again, Samuel. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Halina. Halina is Halina Kurillo, and I probably do not get that right, but I'm trying, is a Ukrainian women's rights activist and a disability rights activist. She is the head of an NGO called Disability Rights Ukraine. Halina's done some incredible work around highlighting the condition of persons with disabilities, particularly children, in institutional care. She has advised the government and international donor on the protection of children who live in institutions and promoting instead as an alternative full family integration. She's written two books. She's written two reports, No Way Home and Left Behind in the War, which are specifically focused on institutionalized persons and populations in Ukraine. She's also the primary author of the report Families Find a Way, which talks about the situation of families which have children with disabilities and raising these children in the situations of full-scale invasion, which are currently being seen in the country. Halina, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your intervention.
Thank you, Amba. I actually am in the process of writing a book, so maybe the slip of the tongue will help me.
Sorry. Yes, sorry.
And, yes, thank you so much for inviting me to participate, and I'm very pleased to be included in the international civil society community who believe that disability rights are human rights and fight for it also. And we at Disability Rights Ukraine, which is a local affiliate, as Amba said, of Disability Rights International, have been fighting for inclusion of people with disabilities locked away in institutions since 2011. And as of now, my country has been at war with Russia for 11 years. And next, I will say a sentence that I have repeated many times, but unfortunately, it is still relevant. Ukraine has one of the highest rates of institutionalization of children in Europe. That is very well documented. Unfortunately, the same goes for adults, but adults are not that well documented. But we do know that children grow up, and in children's institution, we see multiple adults there. And they are also fall between the cracks. They also have the separate adult institutions. We are now in Ukraine at the third attempt of a children's DI, and the first attempt of adult DI. I know you might be thinking the child and adult DI strategies should not be separate. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, they are. That's a whole different story why, but we just now have to deal with that. And but they are in place, and the full-scale invasion in 2022 of Russia into Ukraine, when we've seen a vast amount of international humanitarian relief and technical assistance money going into Ukraine, we did hope as civil society that it would accelerate the process of DI for both children and adults. And we also welcomed very much the guidelines, the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization, including in emergency. But unfortunately, it's been the third year into the war, the full-scale war, I mean, and we haven't seen any significant or meaningful help with the DI in Ukraine. And let me tell you quick how I see the situation. And that is unbelievable. So while I could um,
Hi, Halina, your voice is breaking. I wonder if you maybe switch off your camera, it might be better. I think Halina's camera is frozen. I will just wait a minute to see if she can rejoin the call, maybe on a different connection. But I think it's been very interesting to hear about the situation. Halina, is this connection better? You're on mute. You're on mute, dear.
I am back.
It's
so sorry.
perfect. Yes. It's absolutely fine.
So it's for maybe Sam and I have bad luck today with the connection.
No, it's absolutely fine. You're among friends here. I think you might want to like rewind a little bit because it was a little breaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I saw when I froze. So I was talking about that we are the third year into the war, and we have not
exactly.
We have not seen any significant or meaningful help with the DI. And even though the situation on the ground looks like that, we have civil society experts and international experts discussing and creating plans and strategies on the central level, let's say roughly in Kyiv, right? And on the grounds, institutions together with local authorities are fundraising and becoming bigger, stronger, and they are even advertising their services as like safe places or places to get services, to get community services. That's what they call it. It's amazing. I could talk about it for hours. How institutions advertise themselves on social media for parents to institutionalize their children, or for adults for family members to institutionalize their adults. So it's and it's a very dangerous thing. It is possible because it may be not that obvious to international community, and here the role of international community would be to highlight it on multiple levels. In Ukraine, there is the central level of governance, then there are local authorities, and the local authorities do oversee and have the budget for and are responsible for the community services. So whatever we do in Kyiv will not have power over local authorities who keep, there are so many private donors and small international organizations and separate individuals who invest money into institutions. What was very disturbing was that in 2022, 2023, we saw a lot of so-called life-saving investments into institutions from bigger donors, which are completely against the convention and completely against the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization. We we cannot say it's life-saving to invest into the infrastructure of the institutions, even though the reasons that were given were lack of electricity, like blackouts, then cold weather in winter, hot weather in summer, lack of shelters. That all doesn't make any sense, because people there are suffering. The abuses are horrible. They have been documented before the war started in Ukraine in 2014, after the war started in 2015, and then in 2022 again. And so the Russian occupation, that despite the efforts of Ukrainian army is crawling from east to west, is creates this situation when there are many institutions, both by children, for children and adults, under occupation. Once they are under occupation, we lose track of that. We don't know what is happening to these people. The phones are off. The directors are not responding. We don't know if they're safe. It has been happening even prior to full-scale invasion. So in 2014-15, we already saw that. So the role of international community could have been to help or push the government to develop the evacuation plans. Now there is also the opposite situation. When there are evacuation plans of people with disabilities or the elderly or the people from institutions on the east that are about to be occupied, then they end up in institutions on the west. DRI and DRI Ukraine documented it in 2022 for children, but the same situation is happening for adults, and adults from the community who were living in their homes in the community. Once they are evacuated by government, most likely they are placed in the institutions, which makes institutions overcrowded. So while there is like two separate tracks. On the one track, DI guidelines say that in emergencies, deinstitutionalization should be accelerated. But on the parallel track, the government is basically putting people into institutions, making it even worse. And the institutions themselves are a building and only being strengthened. And I don't have like one solution for that to round up. But as Samuel said, Amba at the beginning said that we should not only talk about cooperation as funding, but I agree with Samuel that very new disability rights organizations or those that are grassroots they do lack access to donor funding. And the donor funding goes to organizations that are more established, which is good, but also the grassroots needs money, and the parents and family members of people with disabilities, including people with all kinds of disabilities, not only sensory and physical, have to be proactively included. I mean, we might say that, oh, they are not included because they are not, they don't raise their hand to be included, but they have to be empowered to raise their hand and to be included in this process of deinstitutionalization. Because I think to wind up, I think we cannot even use the word inclusive in Ukraine. Like, I think I'm against using word inclusive in Ukraine until we get rid of the fenced places. How can we talk about inclusion and barrier-free society if we still have some people who cannot benefit from inclusive education that is on the ground, from barrier-free environment, from inclusive employment? So these are things to consider. Apologies for a very pessimistic view, but we are very disappointed and very frustrated about what is happening in the third year into the war, and with the standards and with the reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that. It was a very evidence-based and emotional reflection on what has been happening, even prior to the humanitarian situation that we're seeing in the country. I think it's really what's really striking from this intervention, something that those who've been working in the sector know, that the reality in Ukraine was that there were actually fresh investments into institutionalization. During this, on the pretext of saving people's lives, but effectively, what's only been happening is that we have people being shifted from institution to institution as the invasion continues to spread. And I think one of the also important things which came up there and which is not unique to, sadly, not unique to the discussion around deinstitutionalization is the barriers that smaller organizations experience in receiving funding. For those of you who'd like to read more about this, there are resources on the website of the GLAD network. My colleague Elena here actually works very closely with them, which is the Global Action on Disability. And there have been position papers on the kind of funding barriers that OPDs experience, smaller organizations of persons with disabilities experience. And therefore, funding often goes to, like Elena said, like these are more established organizations, but then smaller organizations which can actually implement community solutions don't get a piece of this pie. So many, many thanks. And I think we will have questions in the audience. I'd like to recall to everyone that there is a Q&A box here. So you can use the Q&A box to ask questions. And we will also open the floor for questions later on. I see a hand raised, just to keep that in mind. So it is now, I now will turn to Dorothy. Dorothy Gould she's the founder of Liberation. Dorothy is a survivor of the mental health system in the United Kingdom, and she has been campaigning for the rights of persons with disabilities to achieve full human rights under the CRPD. She is the founder of Liberation, which is an organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities, which calls for full implementation of the convention. Liberation works closely with a wide range of organizations of persons with disabilities in England, but also other parts of the UK, but also other countries. And they welcome joint action with other organizations. There's a major campaign that they've just launched against the mental health bill, which is currently in the UK Parliament. And they're also supporting major campaigns against the UK government's plans to cut welfare benefits and against the assisted dying bill, which has serious consequences for persons with disabilities, but also persons with psychosocial disabilities. Dorothy, it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to you. Welcome, and please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to start by explaining why Liberation, the organisation that I founded, and its OPD allies are so concerned about the mental health bill, which is currently progressing through the UK Parliament. The bill's intended to update the Mental Health Act 1983, the piece of mental health law which is in force in England and Wales at the moment. The UK government has described the bill as making this act fit for the 21st century. In reality, the bill will do very much the opposite if it's enacted. That's because it's based on the assumption that the Mental Health Act 1983 just needs, in quotes, improving. However, the 1983 Act is in such fundamental breach of the CRPD that only radical legal change will achieve what's needed. Problems with the Mental Health Bill include the fact that it continues to draw on the European Convention on Human Rights, a convention which supports depriving people of their liberty if they're judged to be what's called of unsound mind. The UK government is not willing to do more than try to reduce the ever-growing numbers of people with psychosocial disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, and neurodiverse people who are subjected to involuntary detention in psychiatric hospitals and forced treatment both in them and in the community. The government's stance is risk-driven, not rooted in the CRPD. Its argument is that because people with psychosocial disabilities can, they say, be a risk to themselves and others, some involuntary detention will always be necessary. Yet there's not even an adequate research basis for this approach. While the bill does contain some increased provision for community resources, its approach fails to be rooted in the CRPD deinstitutionalization guidelines. It also seems doubtful whether there'll be adequate funding from the government, even for the limited increase in community resources that the government has in mind. The government has seriously failed to ensure any meaningful influence over the bill for people with psychosocial disabilities who are campaigning for full human rights under the CRPD. Those of us with psychosocial disabilities who experience more than one form of discrimination, related, for example, to gender, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, and physical impairments, have even less of an influence. These huge issues with the mental health bill have reinforced for me the importance of working jointly with groups in other countries to campaign both for full deinstitutionalization and the right of people to live independently in the community and be an integral part of communities. Without joint working across countries, it can be very hard for an OPD to make progress in campaigning for full human rights, as has been very apparent to those of us working at Liberation. That's because in Liberation's case, we're the only OPD for people with psychosocial disabilities to take a lead in campaigning against the mental health bill, and we're in a very isolated position. It's not just the UK government that supports the bill, but UK political parties as a whole. The bill is also backed by the majority of mental health professionals, academics, trade unions, the media, and non-OPD charities. In addition, support for us from pan-disability OPDs is rather mixed. Working jointly with like-minded people in other countries has been enormously helpful in decreasing our sense of isolation, and hopefully in turn we could use joint work to help decrease isolation which OPDs are experiencing in other countries. To its shame, and as Samuel mentioned, the UK government has a background of colonialism, and this has caused huge damage, not only within countries that it colonialised, but within the UK as well. The sorts of attitudes that lie behind the Mental Health Act 1983 and now the Mental Health Bill stem very much from the sort of oppression that's embedded in colonialism. The UK is also moving noticeably and increasingly towards the right. That's deeply concerning in itself. In addition, this context makes it even harder for Liberation to contest discriminatory mental health law. At Liberation, we're also very aware of difficult contexts in many other countries, and that's why we see it as vital to join together to combat institutionalization. There's some great examples of genuine progress towards the CRPD in a number of countries. However, successive UK governments have either had a poor awareness of these or have seemed very resistant to learning from them. At Liberation, we found them very useful for ourselves, but also hopefully, in joint work with colleagues in other countries. I'm not someone who ever gives up fighting for full human rights. However, it's really tough to do that from one small OPD, which Liberation is. So it's been hugely encouraging to have had international support from Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI, the Centre for the Human Rights of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry in the United States, and the non-government organisation Validity. For example, TCI has not only given Liberation strong encouragement with its campaign against the mental health bill, but has helped us to achieve international support from OPDs and societies across the globe. That's made a huge difference to us. And in turn, we want to offer all the support we can to OPDs elsewhere. For all these reasons, Liberation strongly supports the emphasis on international cooperation in Article 32 of the CRPD. Even if state governments are falling well short of this, OPDs and their allies can all work together to promote such cooperation and work together to emphasise its vital importance to our governments. And it's crucial that we do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. I think that the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities themselves experience isolation. And so it's no surprise that often the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities also feels that level of isolation. And it's therefore, I think the points which you highlighted about the role of sharing within organizations, across organizations, the kind of learnings that we have from advocacy that's taken place in other countries. Unfortunately, countries which were all formerly under the Commonwealth have similar legislation, unfortunately, and we've all gone through our own stages of amendments or refreshes. And I think that a very important guideline which exists now, which came out quite recently, is the WHO, the World Health Organization, came out with guidelines. This is for general information if you're in countries which are also experiencing a change of or proposed change of law around the around mental health. The World Health Organization came out with guidances on laws or mental health laws, which is a change to their previous guidance. And I will try and put the link in the chat box for you all if anybody would like to read it. But I think, Dorothy, the situation in the United Kingdom with this legislation, as well as the impact of financial cuts, which could impact people and push them into situations of institutionalization, is something that is huge and heartbreaking. And we really wish you all the best and our all support in your advocacy to ensure that the risks associated with such approaches are mitigated completely. Many thanks for joining us and your comments. I will now pass to an old friend of the world, users and survivors of psychiatry, Oh-Young, who's joining us from Korea. Oh-Young Kwon is the vice chairperson of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. He is the founder and representative of the Korean Alliance for Mobilizing Persons with Psychosocial Disabilities, and he is a human rights lawyer practicing in Incheon. Oh-Young is also a standing member of the Working Group on Disability at UNESCAP. He has notably filed a lawsuit to the Constitutional Court of Korea in 2014, and he received a decision against the Article 24, which spoke about involuntary hospitalization of persons with mental illnesses as it was deemed under the legislation, which was possible with just the consent of two family members. And he received a decision against this legislation from the Constitutional Court. He himself, like many of us, is a user and survivor of psychiatry. Oh-Young, it's my pleasure to hand the floor to you. Many thanks for joining us quite late in the evening from Korea.
Thank you, Amba. I'm happy to share my experiences of international cooperation for deinstitutionalization in this region. I will use my presentation. Actually, I am a board member of World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, but not the vice chair. After July Santigos, who was the chair of our organization, passed away. Daniel Iga, who was former IDA board member, became acting chair. Now I'm just a board member. And contrary to Article 4 and 14 of the CRPD, and denying the legal capacity breaches Article 12 of the CRPD. But mental health law to establish mental hospitals are keeping people with psychosocial disabilities in the institutions, including psychiatric hospitals and sanatoriums, aside from the community. About 70,000 persons with psychosocial disabilities hospitalized in mental hospitals and sanatoriums. Most are private by the Mental Health Act of 1995, which has been enforced for 40 years in Korea. Average stay in the mental hospitals is more than 200 days. There is no informed consent for the hospitalization and forced treatment in the Mental Health Act. No guarantee of conflict of interest, no user involvement, no monitoring system. The Mental Health Act of Korea had been enforced from 31st December 1996. The goal of Mental Health Act of 1995 was to prevent mental illness and promote mental health of the people. But the real purpose of the act was to prevent crimes from mental illness and to increase mental health hospital beds. Do you know the suicide rate of Korea is the highest in the world? But suicide rate of the persons with severe mental illness during 1 year since discharge is 24.68 times more than the general population in the community. This graph shows the situation in Korea. The OECD told Korean mental health system as hospitals dominate Korea's mental health care. The Korean model of mental health care is based on institutionalization with long length of stay. It was told by making mental health count, the publication by OECD in 2014. And I first tried to improve the process of the involuntary hospitalization, working as a member of Mental Health Commission of the Incheon Metropolitan City, but it failed and became to know there is a strong cartel on the issue. It's been 10 years first participating TCI conference and workshop in 2014 in Bangkok. I shared my experience of institutionalization by Mental Health Act in Korea with TCI members who are from Asia Pacific countries. In some TCI members from countries like Thailand and Philippines advocated in their country to stand against making mental health law in their countries after knowing harmness of institutionalization by the mental health system by the mental health law. This is a photo taken by TCI Asia in Bangkok in 2014. And the founder, Bhargavitava, passed away 2 years ago. TCI in Incheon in 2015. We had a very good conference and workshop in Incheon in 2015. TCI Asia and Kami cooperation. Former CRPD member Montian Buntan and Hyung-sik Kim, with those OPD leaders from ASEAN Pacific countries, made presentations with Human Rights Commission of Korea, had an international symposium on CRPD and inclusion of the persons with psychosocial disabilities, and had a workshop also. IDA, CBM, OSF, WNUSP, APCD with Korean Disability Foundation and Sarangbat Foundation, Incheon Travel Corporation supported for the event. This is a photo taken in TCI 2015 in Incheon. You can find Amba in the photo. Lessons of the 2015 meeting in Incheon. Inclusion became a popular term and agenda in Korea after the symposium with National Human Rights Council of Korea on 17th November. On 21st November, in the week, Saturday morning, the members from TCI with CRPD members Hyung-sik Kim and Mi-young Kim, she is current chair of the CRPD committee, and APCD chair Kyung-suk Park had a meeting with the government director of the Disability Division of the Department of Health and Welfare. We asked the implementation of CRPD in Korea, and the director answered there was no proceedings of the CRPD implementation after getting CEOs from the CRPD committee in 2014. But the meeting made the government director move forward on that issue. And I can share lessons of international cooperations. With a few Korean lawyers, I made a lawsuit to the Constitutional Court to abolish the institutional hospitalization system in Korea in 2014. And the court decided the article allowing involuntary hospitalization by consent of two family carers and medical diagnosis of psychiatric doctors was not compatible to the right to the freedom of the Article 12 of the Constitution. We also claim the involuntary hospitalization violates the legal capacity of the persons with psychosocial disabilities. But the court did not answer for their legal capacity. Korean National Assembly revised the Mental Health Act in 2016, but which only reinforced the safeguard of the involuntary hospitalization procedure, but there were no arrangements for deinstitutionalization and community inclusion. In Korea, the status quo, psychiatric hospitals and mental health professionals don't want persons in the mental hospitals and sanatorium to go out for community living. When the COVID-19 affected Korea in February 2020, the first 7 dead persons were in the mental hospital. Those were mental hospital patients in the same closed psychiatric wing in a local mental hospital. The funeral was the first going out of the first dead person in his 60s by COVID-19 who had been stayed in the same psychiatric hospital for 20 years. And Japanese lawyers made a declaration on deinstitutionalization 2 years ago. And we will make a study visit in
Today.
Korea.
Because I don't. Or tomorrow.
Sorry, Mohanna, could you mute, please? Could I ask? Yeah, thank you.
Japanese lawyers made a declaration. Japanese Lawyers Association made a declaration on deinstitutionalization 2 years ago, and will make a study visit in Korea September this year. We Korean lawyers and Japanese lawyers will cooperate on deinstitutionalization in both countries. Today, just before this meeting, lawyers advocating human rights of the persons with disabilities with UN professionals from ASEAN countries had a Zoom meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to exchange the information and experiences of them in their countries. There is an attempt of legal harmonization of the CRPD to the national law system and the strategic action to realize CRPD in countries. If donors and OPDs can support the lawyers' meeting of ASEAN countries, we can contribute the institutionalization in ASEAN Pacific countries. Because the institutionalization could bring the change of the budget allocation, reallocation, and power balance between the mental health professionals. I think the deinstitutionalization could be possible by the cooperation and strategic efforts by governments, development partners, donors and OPDs of the persons with psychosocial disabilities, users and survivors of psychiatry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oyong, for your presentation. I apologize for wrongly mentioning you. You are the board member of WNUSP, and the chair, Daniel Iga, I know is in the audience as well. And also for explaining to us, again, looking at the impact of international cooperation when it came to the support of a global organization of persons with disabilities, in impacting national level advocacy, really giving a push on the rights of persons with disabilities after you had this intervention. But also, I think the sharings that were from regional organizations, and I think there's a lot that countries with similar legal systems can learn from each other on, legal harmonization and advocacy strategies. And it's been a real pleasure to read or to hear from you about your own journey around advocacy, though, the success at the Supreme Court, but also what enabled that kind of strategic litigation to be successful was this level of cooperation that we see between organizations, between professionals. And that's been a great journey that we've been taken on. So many, many thanks for that. I will now go actually to the other side of the world. So while this is a late evening for Oyong, it's a very early morning for our next speaker, Sylvia Kwan. Sylvia is the president of Colectivo Vida Independiente de Guatemala. She's done extensive work on the rights of women and girls with disabilities in Guatemala and in fact around the world. Of course, we all know her as she's served as an independent expert on the on the committee on the rights of persons with disabilities. At IDA, of course, we remember her very fondly as she was the senior human rights advisor at IDA. I remember when India underwent its processes, Sylvia was a great help to the OPD movement in India. Sylvia continues to be a very, very important voice in the disability movement. She works as an independent consultant to several OPDs and INGOs working on disability inclusion, particularly on the issue of gender. And of course, she has been deeply involved in the deinstitutionalization agenda in Latin America. And Sylvia is actually going to reflect, I believe, on what happens. We've spoken a lot about investments, but what happens when investments are reduced? What happens then? How does that involve? How does that affect deinstitutionalization reforms in a region which has actually seen the most progress around Article 12? And I will let her take the floor to explain the rest. Really looking forward. Sylvia, welcome. Good morning to you. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to be here and to share this panel with distinguished panelists. I salute each and every one of you. So I will focus in the Latin American region, and I will try to be as very brief because, well, there have been many speakers before me. So I think that when we talk about budgetary reallocations and shrinking of cooperation for disability rights, we should first pay attention to the very reason why these budgetary reallocations and cooperation cuts are taken.
How it has benefited persons with disability and why you do not want
hi, sorry, could I ask also other speakers to mute themselves, please? Could I ask the co-host to please mute other speakers? Alexandra, could you please do the needful?
Thank you.
And then the speaker was signed it. Remember the way you drafted?
I'm so sorry. Sylvia, I'm so sorry. Just give us a minute.
Let me fix this.
Yeah. Can you please mute Samuel? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I was saying that we should first pay attention to the reason behind the budgetary cuts and the loss of financing from international cooperation for development. Many times it all responds to the regression in human rights in this region. There is a strong regression, anti-rights tendencies that have risen up recently in many countries, not only in Latin America. I can think of many countries around the world. And there has been a backlash to human rights, especially the most recently recognized human rights. And of course, this will have a strong impact on disability rights, and particularly to the most vulnerable within the disability movement. And these are persons in institutions. This will have the budgetary reallocation, budgetary cuts, and financing laws will, of course, impact more specifically in certain issues. So I will talk about some things that have happened in the region. So some of the issues, for example, have been targeted to backlashing the rights of women in general. So sexual and reproductive health and rights have been severely backlashed in the region. And of course, this will severely impact on the rights of women and girls with disabilities. And when we go into the institutional context, this will severely hinder those violations that occur frequently within institutions. For example, forced sterilization, violence, and abuse, which is widespread within institutions. In some Latin American countries, and I'm going to talk about those I know more, like mine, anti-rights tendencies have come along with far-right governments. They have not only broken down the deinstitutionalization efforts for those countries where these efforts have begun, but also there is a taking up again of the medical model of disabilities. So policies are being redrafted or retaken up, emphasizing on the impairments of people and not on the disabilities again. So governmental institutions that with much effort coming from the disability movement moved into the social model of disability have gone back, embracing again the medical and charity models of disabilities. social protection measures, if there were any, are being downsized or canceled. So the sole idea of independent living and measures for deinstitutionalizations have not even started in many places. And what I'm describing is what is happening with governmental or state institutions. Many times, these institutions are backslashing, but in many cases where those institutions were not strong enough, many of the supports provided for persons with disabilities to live in the community were being implemented by civil society organizations, service providers, or even organizations of persons with disabilities. Peer support, for example, even personal assistance and other day-to-day supports that enable persons with disabilities to live in the community were frequently offered by peers or by civil society organizations related to disability. And usually the funding for the implementation of these supports came from international development agencies. Notably in this region, I can mention USAID. Now that US has been shut down, these supports are being downsized or canceled. There are still many institutions in the region. Even though the institutionalization reforms were taking place or being started, they have probably stopped, halted, and many institutions that were in the process of deinstitutionalization or in the process of being shut down will probably halt. And being put in place to the way that things were being run for the CRPD. This easier for governments, especially, to keep things under their control, under the medical and charity models. So, of course, financing holds a fundamental role when we talk about deinstitutionalizations. And international development cooperation being cut down for civil society, of course, runs the risk that there will be no more advancements, and that institutionalization will again be the prevalent option for governments to put away persons with disabilities that have more intense needs. And we're thinking, of course, of persons with psychosocial disabilities, persons with multiple disabilities, with intellectual disabilities that need higher supports, that need more social protection programs to be put into place, and that, of course, need more resourcing. Again, we run the risk that psychiatrists, physicians, other type of professionals will hold the voices of, quote, experts in disabilities. In countries like mine, for instance, this is happening all the time. And the voices of persons with disabilities who rose, I would say, when the CRPD was adopted, are now being silenced because, of course, funding, again, is disappearing. And even though there are still some donors that do not depend on government financing, so again, after the shutdown of USAID, there are still some private donors that will support some smaller efforts. These efforts are just too small to really make a difference. I will provide an example in Argentina, a country where many of the other countries in the region look forward to because they have made many advancements recently regarding, for example, sexual and reproductive rights. So just recently, less than 5 years ago, abortion was legalized, and the legislation that legalize abortion in this country did include, with a disability perspective, the abortion for women and girls with disabilities. But as for today, Argentina is closing down or downsizing their government institutions. So, for example, their disability institution, which before was under the direct authority of the president of Argentina, has now been moved under the hierarchy of the Ministry of Health. So this is just a clear example of how institutions that have the responsibility of implementing policies for deinstitutionalization and for the implementation of the CRPD overall, not only are changing their perspective around disability, downsizing their policies to medical and charity models again, reducing their budget, reallocating budget to pushing forward again policies that institutionalize persons with disabilities, and of course forgetting about those further behind. So again, I'm going to say that the smaller efforts, those that come from the most invisible, those that come from the smaller organizations, are disappearing. And what can we do? We have very little options, very few options nowadays when we think of funding being reduced to the minimum. I think that our options are to strengthen coalitions. Bigger organizations, especially the regional ones, should pay attention to the smaller organization and to the smaller groups of persons with disabilities. We must raise our claim also, taking up one of the slogans from the Global Disabilities Summit, 15% for the 15%. I think we must really take up this commitment that governments that participated in the Global Disability Summit made towards the disability movement, and not forget that governments are the first responsible to implement the CRPD and deinstitutionalization efforts. So in this way, disability movements and of course, organizations of users, survivors of persons with psychosocial disabilities, users and survivors of psychiatry, persons with psychosocial disability, organizations of persons with disabilities in general, should not forget that the farthest behind are those that have more difficulties raising their voices. And of course, those within institutions, there are still thousands and thousands of persons with different types of disabilities living in institutions. Need for those of us who are still not institutionalized to raise our voices very loud and not forget about them. So we must strengthen coalitions. So I say that again because it is very important. Bigger organizations supporting the smaller ones, and those with bigger funding, trying to, of course it is difficult, but trying to not forget about the smaller ones that don't have funding or have the minimum of funding. We must also partner with other civil society organizations that defend human rights and not necessarily disability rights, but we must also remember that human rights are intersectional, and that we must not forget that when we talk about persons with disabilities, we're also talking about women and girls with disabilities, older persons with disabilities, indigenous persons with disabilities, and of course, children with disabilities. So I will just stop here because I think
Thank you.
I just passed my time, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, for that very comprehensive reflection. And I think what's important is that it's not just a backtrack on funding that we're seeing, but it's also a backtrack on approaches. It's also a backtrack on inclusion. I think one of the most alarming things which was mentioned by way of an anecdote was that you have the ministry or departments of disability moving under the health ministry as opposed to maybe other places, and there's been a huge negative impact of major donors in these spaces. For example, USAID, and the impact is really felt by the ones who are most at risk, the ones experiencing high restrictions in participation. And of course, a really important resource or a really important tool to leverage, which Sylvia mentioned, is the Amman-Berlin Declaration. I put the link in the chat for those of you hearing about this for the first time. It mentions 15% for the 15%. If the governments want to, commit resources, it should be 15%, keeping in mind that there are 15% of the population who are persons with disabilities. And 74 countries till date have signed up for this, signed up for this. You can check the link. There is a document which tracks all the countries which have signed up for the Amman-Berlin Declaration. If your country is signed up for it, it's a good way to follow up. Many questions in the Q&A box are actually about how we can action this in the Global South, how we can action deinstitutionalization strategies in the Global South. So thank you again, Sylvia. And now, since we talked about the Amman-Berlin Declaration, we're actually going to Amman now for our speaker, Dr. Muhannad El-Azeh, who is a member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we're super thrilled to have him on the call today with us, representing the committee, of course. In terms of his career, he broke new ground as the youngest and the first person with a disability to serve in the Jordanian Senate, and he later held the post as Secretary General of Jordan's Higher Council on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Dr. Muhannad also led the drafting of Jordan's 2017 Disability Rights Law and the National Accessibility Strategy. In 2022, he was elected to serve as an independent expert on the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in his work, he has been bridging his lived experience, legal expertise, and has been a very strong campaigner on legal reforms like legal capacity as well as deinstitutionalization. So it is my pleasure to invite you, sir, for your intervention. Dr. Muhannad, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now, right?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleasured to be here, and also I highly appreciate having this webinar about the DI, which is, again, I mean, one of the top priorities, not only here in Jordan, but also for the CRPD committee and I'm sure globally. I would like to tackle upon how the CRPD committee can, through monitoring the Article 32, the international cooperation, make sure that international cooperation programs are really in favor of supporting comprehensive and, again, accurate deinstitutionalization process. I would like to start with what you mentioned, Amman-Berlin Declaration. Jordan was also honored to be the co-host for the Third Global Disability Summit, and we co-authored or co-drafted the declaration. So now I think this document forms a solid ground for us in the committee as a tool in order to add more features for the to track and monitor the implementation of Article 32. And the declaration is derived exactly, conceptually, I would say, from the two paragraphs of this article. When I'm saying that, this means that there is the clear obligation on the donors on, if you like, in a clearer language, the developed countries to make sure that their international development programs, their aid, their support, whether, of course, financial or in-kind support for the global south or the developed countries, these programs or support should be always in conformity with the convention. And being more specific, these grants should serve, again, accurate, correct deinstitutionalization process. Why I am emphasizing accurate and correct? Because unfortunately, we observed so many, I would say, international programs. I would say maybe sometimes unintentionally, sometimes maybe due to the lack of common understanding about the deinstitutionalization. We observed so many international programs. They believe that they are supporting, for example, the deinstitutionalization, in particular through huge grants for social protection. Meanwhile, when you analyze these supported in some countries deinstitutionalization process, you will find them not necessarily in you know I mean in conformity with the convention. For example, some donors, as far as I recall, even EU, for example, they don't have restriction or reservation for very, I would say, recent time to allocate some of their grants by local authorities or national authorities, for example, to make renovation for some institutions. And usually the justification by the government that we are working through holistic approach or twin track approach, sorry. So we need to improve the situation in the institutions until we make the DI. It's not the time maybe to discuss this approach, but the question is, do these donors really have the necessary tools in order to monitor and to track this claim to make sure that this is really correct and the maintenance or the renovation, it's in its minimum requirements and it leads to the institutionalization? For example, I'm not saying that I'm supporting this, but at least this is something we saw it frequently, but to be honest, without clear observation or monitoring. Some agencies was mentioned, like USAID, for example. In this particular point, they have a clear rule: no grants, no money by any means should be allocated nationally in the countries they are working in for institutions, whatever these are. I mean, whatever the reason is. And if the government believes that they need kind of maintenance or regular renovation, they should do it from their budget, but the money should be allocated for deinstitutionalization. In the committee for this particular issue, which is embedded in the first paragraph of Article 32, I would say, usually we try our best in order to collect the data, the information, and to ask the countries. But to be honest, very rare. I mean, I found convincing evidences or answers from the countries that they have reliable monitoring tools in order to tell us if the money they are contributing or giving to other countries, if they are really invested to promote inclusion and to end institutionalization. Now, the second paragraph of this article, and this is something we insisted to reflect on Amman Berlin Declaration. As you know, it talks about the responsibility of the recipients. And the article clearly says that international cooperation does not mean by any means that the countries who are benefiting from international cooperation, that they shouldn't do their role and their responsibilities. This is why in a Berlin Declaration, we insisted that there shall be a clear mention for the ownership for the countries who are benefiting from international cooperation. This means that these countries, they have their role at two levels. As recipients, they have to design their proposals, their supported, funded projects in order to be entirely inclusive and disability inclusive, and also to make sure this is their role because they are the experts in their national context. And here, there is no other choice rather than to be done through OPDs and persons with disabilities, because they are the real experts when it comes to how to make sure that these grants must be invested and deployed in order to abolish or end the institutionalization and to create community inclusive services and settings for persons with disabilities and others. The second issue is that, as Sylvia mentioned, the sustainability issue. The problem, I would say, in so many countries that international cooperation usually, or unfortunately, in particular, when it comes to disability, is being used not to create a system, not necessarily to strategize the work and to ensure and secure sustainability, but more is to operate projects, which means that when the project is done, it's done. There is no alternatives. And every time you can hear, for example, nice words and good, I would say, words and intentions from some international donors that, yeah, I mean, we want to initiate this project, but we want to make sure that the sustainability is there and the government is allocating the money, which is not the case. I'm saying in particular in the disability context, more specific when it comes to institutionalization. Why is that? Because already there is an incredible resistance for deinstitutionalization in so many countries. We struggled to death in 2017 to pass the article in our law which prohibits institutionalization and put obligation on the government to end the institutionalization within 10 years. Now we are about to reach 2027, which is the time frame to end the deinstitutionalization. And unfortunately, I would say that we achieved not more than 5%. In the best cases, 7%. Why? Because, again, I mean, of course, everybody can say the pandemic, everybody can say lack of money. I would say two main reasons. Slow procedures, of course, but more than that, full, dependence on the international grants in order to operate the process. So this is why we started and we succeeded. I'm so happy about that recently to allocate money in the state budget for the alternative, what's so called here, alternative services, inclusive alternative services for the institutionalization, including financial aid for the families, home adaptation, personal assistance. I would conclude by saying that in the committee, my colleagues and I, of course, maybe we need to work more in depth in order really to track in details the implementation of Article 32 in linkages with Article 19 and other, of course, cross-cutting articles. And as we started with Amman Berlin Declaration, I would conclude with Amman Berlin Declaration, saying that we have good tools there that we can build on, which is, for example, the DAC marker, which is, a very good tool issued by that committee, derived from the Organization of Economic Cooperation Development, OECD. And then we can build on that. We can use that first for disability inclusion, to track, to measure the inclusivity in international development programs. And also, we can customize it specifically to be, or to lay out specialized, if you like, tracking tools in order to make sure that international cooperation development programs, they are really, really supporting, promoting deinstitutionalization again and again, correctly and accurately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohanad, for those reflections on both the role of the CRPD committee, but also the important tool that we have with us now, which is the Amman-Berlin Declaration, and indeed where we see a kind of intersection. I think that this is an important reflection, that when we have international programming which says that it supports deinstitutionalization, but in actuality that might not be the case. And kind of linked to that is, I think it would be really amazing to see the CRPD committee looking at where states talk about international cooperation and whether that's really impacting the lives of people in institutions or people at risk of institutions. And indeed, questions around sustainability of interventions of involving international cooperation, but also looking at the role of donors and whether donors have the tools to monitor claims that certain interventions actually do support deinstitutionalization. And also, I would draw attention to the fact that, and since we are moving into the question and answer session, there was a question in the chat box about whether there is a moral obligation to also advocate for increased funding to community and home-based services when we advocate for deinstitutionalization. And I think what Dr. Mohanad presented is a really great example of an answer to this, whereas in Jordan, the state committed to deinstitutionalization in a period of 10 years. And in parallel to that, the movement advocated for and implemented schemes and programs around personal assistance, social protection, home adaptation, and others, which go a long way to ensure that people receive the services that they need. I also would encourage everyone on this call to go through the guidelines, the deinstitutionalization guidelines. I put a link to it in the chat, as well as the Amman-Berlin Declaration again, which is a great tool for you to take back and advocate on in your respective contexts, and to get countries to sign on if they've not signed on already. So with that, I think that we would like to also give it back to the panelists for some closing remarks, and we have closing remarks as well. But I'm going to just draw attention to the panelists that there are some questions specifically in the context of Somalia about what happens when there is conflict and displacement, and what practical steps humanitarian actors can take to integrate the principles of deinstitutionalization in their responses, and how can donors shift priorities. So that's one question which I will open to any panelist that would like to respond. I'm now going to the attendees list. And if anybody has a question, so we have a question from Daniel Iga. So I'm going to ask my colleagues handling the webinar to give him speaking functionalities, I suppose. So we've got questions on humanitarian context. I'm now going to give the floor to Daniel, and I'm not sure if we will have time for questions beyond that, but please do use the Q&A box for your questions. Daniel, I will give you the floor now. Thank you. Daniel, we aren't able to hear you.
Hello.
Hi, Daniel. We can hear you now. If you can introduce yourself before speaking. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Amber, so very much for this very important topic. My name is Daniel Iga Mwesigwa, the chair of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, acting as of now. And my question, because we are short of time, yes, I have heard intently, and I really thank you, all the panelists, for all that you have given and all efforts which are being done around the world. And now the question is, especially in the global south, because we are dealing with mindset change, and it's not something which is very sudden, and are our communities ready to receive our peers? That is a very pertinent question, because we can advocate for deinstitutionalization well, but then are the communities ready to receive our peers in the communities? Are they well sensitized? Because point in focus, like in Uganda, most of the communities are still very negative. Of recent, I've been following up a case of where one lady was burnt with hot oil in the night by these food vendors. Maybe touched one of their chips or something of the sort, and somebody just got hot oil and poured on her. And unfortunately, we did all we could, but we lost her. And so in such instances, now, are our communities ready? Have we done enough sensitization and capacity building that once the institutions are closed, then our people will be safe in the communities? About independent living, yes, those are some good theories written, but practically, are our communities ready to receive our colleagues coming from institutions? Is a very pertinent topic which we need to look at it in detail, and maybe country specific, so that we know that once institutions are closed, then they will be well received in the communities. I once was in Denmark. And
Hi, Daniel, I'm so sorry, but just to make sure we have time for questions from anyone else. Yeah, okay. But I think the point is well taken about how we address this issue of awareness within the community and how we ensure that communities are willing to welcome people and that people are not experiencing violence and abuse when they come into the community. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
I'm going to now just turn to our panelists, and just if any of them would like to make any reflection on the questions or issues that came up in the Q&A box. Not to put anyone on the spot, it's entirely up to you if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, can I please?
Yes, of course, Dr. Manav. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank Daniel for his excellent question. Look, I mean, I will give you a quick answer from local experience. What happened here in Jordan when we started, there was a huge resistance, and still, it's not like before, but still we have it. The mistake we did here that we've been a little bit in rush in order to get persons with disabilities from institutions to their whether biological or extended families or alternative families. We've been scared. We've been really scared when we observed one case or two cases where families, they decided to send back again their daughters and sons to the institutions due to the lack of preparation, whether in the family or within the community. What we did immediately, we raised the red flag to the Ministry of Social Development as a council, the higher council, and officially we requested that we need to hold the whole process, meaning that no person with a disability shall be, released from institutions before making sure that we did the whole homework very well. So this is why we started with a different strategy. We started with the easy cases, for example, in order just to make sure that we are conveying very positive messages to the community and convince them. When I'm saying easy cases, because in Jordan, for example, believe it or not, unfortunately, half of the persons, or more than half, in institutions, they are foreigners. So, and this is the most difficult part. So we started with the Jordanians, and the good thing that we started also with the governmental institutions to give example for the private sector. And this is another problem here, that the institutions run by the private sector, they are more, and they are hosting or providing their services to foreigners. So we started with Jordanians. We formed multidisciplinary teams, and we contracted local or national non-governmental organizations who, because we don't have this previous experience, but we have some similar experience, and we give them more knowledge and capacity development, specifically in deinstitutionalization for disabilities. So, for example, we began with we contracted organizations like those are working with deinstitutionalizations for example, quote unquote, what's so-called orphans here, or elderly people, for example, in order to conduct a case study, individual assessment, and for not only for persons with disabilities themselves, but for their families. So, and we started with children, for example, because we want to make sure that all children are out of the institutions before being adults and going to the adults institutions, which is the cases is worse, to be honest. So we took these steps and we start with them, and we are very optimistic that there will be promising results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohanad, for your response. Oyong, I'll hand it over to you for your response, and then what I will do then is that each speaker is going to get an opportunity to give a final closing, and we'd like to know your topmost priority to actualize your ideal on how disability inclusive international cooperation should look. So very short, we'll come around for maybe like, a 30-second answer each, but I'm going to hand over to Oyong first. Thank you.
Thank you, Amba. I want to share the experience of revising the mental health law in Korea in 2016. There was no preparation for changing the terms and conditions of institutionalization by the revision of the Mental Health Act in Korea in 2016. After I filed a lawsuit, the government officials afraid of nullifying the involuntary hospitalization law articles, and they made a revision before the final decision of the Constitutional Court. They made it procedurally very difficult to make persons with mental health problems hospitalized in the mental hospitals. And then after the revision, the people who were caring for their family members who had mental health problems was very difficult to make hospitalization, and there happened many cases of killings by the people with like social disabilities in the communities. after the revision of the law, there was no community-based support and community allocation of funding and resources. Only the government made it difficult to make people hospitalized in the mental hospitals. So we need a step-by-step procedures for and strategically very precise ways of deinstitutionalization. Because if we cannot prepare to welcoming those people from mental hospitals by preparing the resources and community services, there will be very sharp cases. And then those professionals, mental health professionals, use those cases by reinforcing hospitalization. That's my experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oyong, for that reflection on the advocacy which went on. So that's two different regions that showed us what the response was. I'm going to go in reverse order of the speakers that started. So I'm going to start with Dr. Mohannad for his little closing reflection. I will then call on Sylvia. I will then call on Oyong, and then Dorothy, and then Helena, and then last but not least, Samuel. So the floor is for each of you for your closing reflections on what your ideal of disability inclusive international cooperation would be, and what's your topmost priority. I guess we could just focus on the topmost priority on disability inclusive international cooperation. So Dr. Mohannad, if I can turn to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be very literally strict to what you mentioned or what you want me to speak about. I mean, our utmost priority, we are working now with Germany and IDA as three co-hosts and the Arab League in order to create and support piloting phase to implement Amman Berlin Declaration. We will select maybe 4 up to 5 countries, low and middle income countries from the MENA region in order to lay out operational or action plan to implement Amman Berlin Declaration. We hope that as a result of this piloting phase of Amman Berlin Declaration, we will come up with concrete results, and maybe we will develop more comprehensive guidelines for other countries to implement the declaration and to promote international cooperation programs to be more inclusive for persons with disabilities. And we will keep you, for those who are interested, updated about, all the relevant activities. Thank you.
Fantastic. We really look forward to the GDS mechanism as being an enabler. I'm going to pass to Sylvia now.
Thank you very much. I think that there needs to be more participation of persons with disabilities themselves within international cooperation, and there are some good practices being implemented already. I will not mention the names, but there are a few out there. And I think that donors, but especially cooperation agencies that come from government, should be more committed to include persons with disabilities in the decision making. Particularly those governments that are strong in relation to cooperation for development. And of course, I also think that persons with disabilities and their representative organizations should be aware that there is an obligation for governments to include persons with disabilities within their cooperation strategies. So I really encourage everybody here in the call, but everybody around the world, to participate and raise our voices to be heard. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sylvia. Thank you very much. Oyong, your closing?
Thank you. I think the remarks from Sylvia Khan is very important because the involvement of persons with disabilities in deinstitutionalization processes is the key points in the deinstitutionalization process and international cooperation with states. Because the current system of the people in the institutionalization institutions are done by the professionals, mental professionals, so they don't understand what are the livings of the person with psychosocial disabilities. So the involvement of the OPDs of the people with like social disabilities themselves is key, and it can prevent those dangers what Korea experienced because we can understand the situations of the persons with disabilities themselves and their family members and the surrounding community situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayon, for your reflections. Can I ask Dorothy for her closing remarks, please?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about conflict, and for me, a huge issue is going to be finding some way for states to resolve the huge conflicts between them, so that there's a real context where deinstitutionalization can work. And as a sort of key part of implementing that, for me, it's going to be incredibly important that not only is every state signed up to the CRPD, but they're actually genuinely implementing it. Because I think the two issues, one is where states haven't signed, but also an issue where the states are being very ingenious in saying that they're implementing the CRPD, but in reality are just not doing that.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that reflection. And I think that's quite echoed in even what we heard from CRPD committee members, past and present. Halina, over to you for your closing. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the interventions. I cannot agree with Sylvia about increasing meaningful participation of people with disabilities and their family members. So my top priority would be to, in terms of also international cooperation and in making sure they are included in decision making, to increase their capacity to basically do everything we can to prepare family members, people with disabilities and their family members to be, they are already advocates for themselves and for their family members, but to make sure they are ready to participate on a more global level. And just a really quick example, we had DRI Ukraine helped a young woman in 34 get out of institution in Ukraine in a relatively safe area. And you could think that Ukraine during the war, where DI is a priority, would help and support this woman, but it never happened. And the other thing which is important to include international cooperation is not only the generally, and I saw the question in the box about we should probably also invest in community services. We should, but before investing or before advocating for that, I don't see much of the assessment going on. The assessment not only of individual people, but also of resources in particular communities. And Ukraine is a big country. I'm talking mostly from the ground situation. And it's really important. That was not a difficult case. There were resources on the ground. The community supports were there. They just would not support this particular individual because of her institutional past. So that is something, and my other priority would be sensitizing international donors, because there were international donors supporting these community services on the ground, but these community services supported by international donors did not support the person who was pretty much deinstitutionalized by herself. So it's, there are gaps. So sensitizing donors, covering the gaps, keeping an eye on the ground, what is happening really on the ground, not just in the offices and around strategy tables. Thank you.
It's rather tragic that your anecdote echoes the experience in Uganda that Daniel shared about the young woman there, and how a resource mapping is not sufficient and we need to invest more on all of the things that you said. I'm now going to turn to Samuel. Please don't leave, because we do have closing remarks from the Global Coalition on Deinstitutionalization after Samuel speaks, because many of you had questions in the box about where can we go, where are the, how do we build capacity? And, this is a great resource. I've dropped it in the chat box as well. So Samuel, over to you for your closing remarks. Samuel, can you unmute? Yeah. Samuel, your wrap up, please. Samuel, your mic is turning on and off. I'm not sure why that's happening. I'm going to actually now invite, simply because of the paucity of time, I'm going to invite Sabiha Majid. So Sabiha is a dedicated disability rights activist, and she's a researcher at the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. She's here with us on behalf of the Global Coalition on Deinstitutionalization, and she will be providing closing remarks to today's webinar. Sabiha, welcome very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amber, for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here and provide these closing remarks, not welcome remarks. These closing remarks on behalf of the Global Coalition on DI. So firstly, I would like to start off by sincerely thanking all our speakers today: Samuel, Helena, Dorothy, Oyong, Sylvia, as well as Mohammed. I think the discussions were amazing, so rich, so thought-provoking. And it's always just great to hear perspectives from so many different regions. And then I would also like to sincerely thank our sign language interpreters, because of course this event would not be possible without you. And also huge thank you to Ida for putting this webinar together, as well as the other members of the Global Coalition on Deinstitutionalization, who've also been working behind the scenes very hard to put this webinar together. And last but not least, a huge thank you to our participants, because of course there would not be any webinar without your dedication and without you listening and for your contributions. So as you may know, the Global Coalition on DI has been, as part of our dissemination of the guidelines, we have been organizing these webinars for the past year and a half. And they are all available on our website, which has been shared by Jelena in the chat. So if you would like to be in contact with us and just to get some more information about the work that we do, please feel free to contact us on the email address, which is provided on the website. The webinar recordings will be placed there as well. And I would also just like to highlight some of the things that I thought were very important in this webinar. I think number one for me, is the fact that international cooperation is not only about funding, but it's also about sharing experiences, sharing knowledge, transfer of skills, because very often when we hear about international cooperation, the first thing that comes to mind is funding, but it's honestly so much broader than that. It's so important that we share our experiences from our different contexts, our different regions, just so that we can all learn from each other. And secondly, was also very important that I picked up on is that it's not only about, the global South benefiting from the global North, but also vice versa, because I think there's a lot of knowledge in the global South as well, which the global North can learn from. And, I also just want to thank our presenters for, highlighting some of the very good work that they are doing. So thank you. Thank you so much to everyone once again. And with that, I would like to say goodbye and maybe hand over back to Amber if there's any parting words. Thank you once again.
Not at all. I think you've done all of it. I just wanted to see if Samuel was able to unmute himself. Because I would love to hear his closing. I always enjoy listening to him. Samuel, can you hear us? There's something up. I'm so sorry, but I'm pretty sure that we'll get future opportunities. Thanks again for everyone for joining us. Good evening, and I look forward to rewatching the webinar and other resources on the website, as Sabiha mentioned. And please follow the resources in the chat. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.